First of all, let's talk about the president. Waiting 4 days to come out, was that too long in your opinion?
Absolutely. I've loved the back talk from the administration officials now talking to the press. They said, well, we wanted to reassure people, and we thought that waiting to put the president out would be reassuring. Well, I don't think it's very reassuring when this attack happens and it takes over 72 hours to hear from the president. In the meantime, we hear from Napolitano, Janet Napolitano, Homeland Security Secretary, and Robert Gibbs, White House Press Secretary, who both go on the shows 2 days after the event and say the system worked. What kept us from having a utter disaster was a faulty detonation device and some very active and courageous passengers and crew members in the airplane. And that wasn't very reassuring to have the president take that long and in the meantime send out what really looked like the Keystone Kops between Gibbs and Napolitano. Napolitano, to her credit, walked back from the statement on Monday and said, well, the system really didn't work.
Well, and how much do you think that impacts the administration's message when she comes out so strongly to say, hey, it did work, and then less than 24 hours later is forced to concede it failed miserably?
Right. Well, and then the president has to come out and say, you know, I've ordered a review. But I mean, look, this doesn't look very engaged. This you know, this whole way that the administration's handled this strikes me as being a subpar performance. I mean, the president said, for example, that he wanted to deny, or his aide said that the president wanted to deny the terrorists the public attention that they would otherwise get if he spoke out immediately after the incident. Well, look, there's plenty of public attention when somebody tries to bring down a large airliner on Christmas Day. That's going to get a lot of attention, and I didn't understand the logic behind that. If they were really serious about denying the terrorists an opportunity to get international attention, then why the heck are they putting all those 9/11 defendants on trial in New York in a high-profile public venue? I also thought it was ungracious and sort of pathetic that they immediately said, well, it's Bush's fault. You know, these procedures were in place under Bush, and the president went out of his way in his speech to say, well, we shouldn't spread fear and division. This is after his deputy press secretary came out and accused the Republicans of playing politics by raising legitimate questions about how this had handled and the breakdowns in the system. So, I mean, and I think, Shannon, the biggest problem for me on this thing is the context. I thought it was the president had a little bit of a disconnect between the rhetoric in which he said we're going to track down these people who were responsible for this, and then in the same speech he called this an isolated extremist. This is 72 hours after the event, when we knew that this man had jihadist connections, al-Qaeda connections, and that he was part of a broader scheme. And for the president to call this an isolated extremist strikes me as, you know, maybe those White House speechwriters, frankly, were the best of them were off on Christmas break, and they gave it to the junior G-man to write, because that was a very tone-deaf phrase to call this part of a isolated extremist. This is part of a very dangerous threat to our country that the administration needs to take seriously.